And I'm hearing from folks now that are paying for press, that are paying to be on some type of list of the top whatever of whatever. Don't do that. Hi, my name is Damon Brown of DamonBrown.net. My main thing is helping you as a side hustler, a solopreneur, or otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. Today we're going to talk about how you can get more press and why you don't need more press. This actually came up in a few conversations I've had recently with people that I coach, people that I've met out in the world. Now that we're starting to open up again, that's pretty cool. And the conversation is, how can I get more press? Damon, I really want my startup, my idea, my product, my service to take off, but I need more press. How do I get more press? The trick is that you actually don't need more press. It's kind of like applying for your first credit card or getting an ID when you're really young, particularly here in America. If you can get an ID, then you don't actually need an ID. That's how you prove that you can get an ID. You get better credit when you prove that you actually don't need the credit that people are giving you to make a purchase. So it ends up being that you have to create it on your own. The success that I've found personally, and with the hundreds of people that I've coached, very little, if any of it, has come from a big press story that's happened. And I'm hearing from folks now that are paying for press, that are paying to be on some type of list of the top whatever of whatever. Don't do that. As one of my startup colleagues said, you should be getting paid for what you do, not paying other people to shine. And if you're really doing what you're supposed to be doing, that shine from those particular communities you're trying to impact. I'm not saying you're going to be famous. What I am saying is that shine from the communities that you're trying to impact will happen. They will recognize you. It just might not be on your timeline, and it will be based on what you're doing. So instead of worrying about getting press for your new idea, your new startup, your new product, your new service, there are three other things that you can do that really help you elevate exactly what you're supposed to be doing and get the recognition that you believe you deserve and the success that you believe that you deserve. The first thing is to go after your minimal viable audience. I got this from Seth Godin. He talks about, in general, we talk about the minimal viable product, which is a term back in Silicon Valley when I lived there. It's called the MVP. It's from a guy named Eric Ries. I always screw up his last name. Hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Eric Ries, and he came up with a model called the Lean Startup Model. That means you create something, then you get it out to the public, they give you feedback on it, and then you reiterate it. So it's minimally viable. It's not pretty, it's not perfect, but you're getting feedback from the audience and you keep doing that cycle. That's called the Lean Startup Cycle. Seth Godin flipped this on his head and he said, you need to get the minimal viable audience. In other words, who's that person down the street? The proverbial street, like someone on social media, or the person who's literally down the street who represents your customer, who you're trying to serve. How can you take care of them? At the end of the day, you have to take care of one person. You can't begin taking care of 1,000 people. In my last startup, at our peak, we had 250,000 users. But we didn't begin with 250,000 users. We began with one user down the street. And that user became 2, and that became 4, that became 8, and it began that exponential cycle. And so number one, you really want to build that minimal viable audience. Because if you're not taking care of that one person, then how are you going to know you can take care of these other people? How can you talk on that scale? Jim Rohn, who's the mentor of Tony Robbins and was a legendary speaker in his day. He was around a little bit before I was born, back in the 60s and the 70s. He always said, if you don't know what to do with $5, then how can you take care of $5,000? If you can't lead a team of 10 people, how are you going to become a leader of 10,000 people? In other words, whatever you're doing, if you want it to scale, which success is nothing more than getting famous or getting popular with a larger group of people, how can you do that if you haven't taken care of this minimal viable audience? So take care of the few customers that you do have. Make sure they're taken care of. Give that awesome customer service. Give them all the attention in the world. For my startups, So Quotable, and definitely for Cuddler, we were able to scale because me as myself as CMO, and I was also COO, me doing those things, I kept that intimacy as we grew. That's how we were able to grow from, again, a few thousand customers in the first couple of days to 100,000 in the first week to 250,000 shortly before we sold the company. That intimacy was preserved, but that came from that minimal viable audience that we were building on right when we started about a year before. So number one, go after the minimal viable audience. You don't need the big press. You need to take care of the people that you currently have. Number two, whatever you're creating, make it something worth sharing. Seth talks about this as well. But we found this with Cuddler. My startup was a few years ago, and it was about connecting people for hugs. So if you think of Tinder and Grindr, which were very popular when we did the startup in 2014, this was Cuddler, Cuddlr, and it allowed people to connect for hugs. It wasn't about hookup culture. Married people or people who were in committed relationships or didn't want to be in hookup culture could get involved with it. We created a safe environment. We created the culture. As soon as we came out, the press came. Now, what's interesting about it, which was unusual, was that we actually didn't go after the press. Now, my background is journalism. I have 2 degrees in journalism, master's in magazine publishing. I've been a writer for Playboy, the New York Post, contributed to a lot of publications back in the day, still do today. I have a column with Inc. magazine at inkdamebrown.com. And so I have connections in the media world. I understand the media world. I'm used to being on the other side of it, right? I'm not used to being covered. I'm used to covering other people. When we launched Cuddler, the only thing that we did is we talked directly to a handful of publications that I knew and that I trusted. And in some cases I knew people there, but some of them I didn't know the people there, but I trusted the publication. We ended up giving one of them an exclusive Q&A, an interview with my co-founder, Charlie Williams, who was the face of the group. He was the CEO. We did that exclusive Q&A. And we had our own post on Medium, which was the new hot thing back in 2014, at medium.com, where you can publish your own essays. And we did an essay about what we were trying to do with Cuddler and why it wasn't part of the hip hop, of the hookup culture. It wasn't part of hip hop either, of the hookup culture that was happening and so prevalent at the time about a decade ago. That's the only thing we did on release day, September 18th, 2014. You can look it up. That was enough to spark the discussion. Why? Number one, the publication we ended up working with, salon.com, shout out to them, they understood what we were trying to do and they weren't going to make a salacious article accusing us of doing something else, right? We were just trying to do an app that allowed people to connect for hugs. That was literally our intention, nothing lascivious about it, as they used to say back in the day, right? Salon.com would understand that, and the journalist I worked with was awesome about it. Shout out to Tracy. And so when we did that, that positioned us so people would understand. But then more importantly, we created something that people wanted to talk about. Who creates an app for hugs? Do people need an app for hugs? Is it safe? What kind of culture are they creating? What are we saying about the world when you need an app to connect with someone physically and it's not part of hookup culture? What does that say? There's so many cultural touchdowns, which is how I became a co-founder, because my background is journalism and I found it fascinating. And for me to be an entrepreneur and a co-founder of this, I found it honorable to bring that energy back, where it's not about hookup culture, but it's not about connecting with people remotely as you would with like a Facebook or a Twitter. It's something in between. It was the white space. That's what got people talking. It wasn't any of us hounding the press. Again, I'm a journalist. I have a lot of contacts in the press. I was not calling them up. They were calling me up because we created something that other people wanted to talk about. Now, forget the press idea. The people themselves wanted to talk about it. So when someone found out about Cuddler, they said, this is for me. Or they said, this is so bizarre. Who would use this? And what would they do? In either case, whether they loved it or hated it, if you would use extremes, they would tell someone else. They tell someone else, and then that person likely has one of those 2 reactions. And then it goes on. And the people that love the idea are the people that became one of our 250,000 users that we had right before we sold the company. And so if you get something and create something that's worth talking about, you don't need to hunt down the press. The press is going to see everyone else talking about it and then want to write about you. You don't have to pay for the press. You don't even have to call them. It will create its own buzz. Then it naturally leads to the third thing. And the third thing is building community. So you want to create something, as I've talked about in other videos, including my interview with Afrotech, where we talked about with Will Lucas, shout out to him, where we talked about whether you want to build your idea first or if you want to build your skills. And I said, build your idea first, because sometimes we end up being so worried about having things perfect or right, and we're working in our basement trying to get things together and make sure we're at a certain level, that we're not building with the community that we're going to be serving. And when we worked on Cuddler, any other thing that I've created that became a bestseller or big, or my best-selling book, my previous best-selling books, even with the new book, Build From Now, those conversations, those discussions, the community, including you, that I ended up connecting with, that was happening well before the book was written. That was happening well before Cuddler became a reality later on that summer of 2014, actually fall of 2014. But all that summer we were working on it, and we were building community. So by the time it came out, there was already a network of community. For you, that could mean if you have a book coming out, who's your book for? Are you going to the conferences that include the people that would be reading your book? Are you up on the latest news about the people who are reading your book? What are the other things in the competitive space? The people that are interested in your book, what else are they doing? Are they watching Game of Thrones or are they watching WandaVision? I know exactly for Build From Now, I know exactly who my ideal reader is, what they're reading right now, what they care about, what they're involved in, what they're not involved in. That happened well before I announced the book Build From Now, and it came out earlier this year. That community was already built. So when it came out, it had solid sales. It's still selling. You guys are listening to a show that I launched right before Build From Now came out. This show is part of that discussion. So the commentary and the community that's being created around this show, that's the same community that would be interested in this book. Now, it's not the intention of saying you need to buy the book, and that's the only reason why I'm engaging with the community. In fact, it's the reverse. I'm engaging with this community and serving y'all by delivering the book. That in itself gets press. And with Build From Now, I did the launch with Costco, the major warehouse store over here on the West Coast and in the Midwest as well. I've gotten written up in Fast Company. I did stuff with my column with Inc. magazine at inkdamebrown.com, ran an excerpt of the book, and there's plenty of press that's still happening, even as the deluxe version of the book, which is coming out July 28th of 2021. I forgot what year it is. I think it's July 28th, about a month from now of this recording. Even as this new version comes out, there's even more press coming. But that press didn't come from me hounding people. That press came from me, number one, creating and focusing on the minimal viable audience, you. Not focused on the whole world, I'm focused on you. Number two, creating something that's worth sharing, getting other people to talk about. I have that with my buildfromnowquiz.com, which is a free quiz. It's still available. You should come through. 1,000 people have taken it, but it's a free service that's based on Build From Now. A lot of people have come in through, and some folks have written about it because they found the quiz, right? You have to find your own way of making your stuff notable, even if it's something as old school as a book. Lastly, you want to build the community before you actually launch whatever it is. Because if you build the community, there will already be a buzz, and your chance of getting press is a lot higher. Remember, the best press doesn't come from you hunting down a newspaper gal or, finding a magazine guy and saying, you should write about me. It comes from creating something so notable that they see other people talking about it. It's not as difficult as it may seem. And I've been able to do that multiple times. The key, I think, is creating something that's notable enough for a specific audience, the minimal viable audience, creating something that's worth sharing, that they're going to talk about. And lastly, building a community before you have something to sell. I think if you follow those three things, you'll be able to build something beautiful, and you don't have to worry about the press. In fact, some of my strongest stuff, including the Bites as Entrepreneur, again, my best-selling book from a few years ago, I had very limited press on it, and it was still on the bestseller list. So don't worry about the press. Worry about serving your audience. If you want more insight, be sure to check out my playlist. I have a favorite playlist called Smart Creative Habits and Routines. It actually is about 12 or so, I keep losing count, 12, 13 videos similar to this, 15 minutes long, 10 minutes long. They're all giving you game from Beyonce to Oprah to Mark Cuban, all these insightful people, and taking the best of their insights and applying them to you so that you can put them into your everyday business. So be sure and check it out. If you're liking it, please do give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. That gets more stuff into more eyes into this content, so it gets to more people who are pursuing that beautiful journey that you're on to and building the community. And I appreciate y'all's support. Until next time, remember to bring your worth and that you can always build from now. Take care.